Okay, today's daf is Ayin Vav. We are starting the new Perek Chalon. The Mishnah is going to be discussing essentially the issues of connection of chatzerot. So we've talked a little bit about this in the past. You have two chatzerot that are next to one another. They're adjacent. They have, in certain cases, they can join together in one eruv. In certain cases, they cannot, and in certain cases, they have the option. That's what the Mishnah is going to say. Chalon sheben bet chatzerot. If you have a window between two courtyards, dalid al dalid betoch asara. If the window is 4 by 4 tefachim, the dimensions are 4 by 4, and it is within 10 tefachim of the ground, me'aravin shenayim. So they can either have two eruvin, v'imratum arvin achat. So if they want to, they can combine and become the two chatzirot can have one ma'arvin echad, or they can have ma'arvin shenayim. They can have independent chatzirot. Since they have this window that unites them, they can either use the window to connect the two chatzirot, since the window is in between them, or they can say, no, we want to each have our own independent eruv chatzirot. We don't want to unite.
How would they get it back and forth?
Well, there's no door in between the two.
I know, so how would they go back and forth? If they had one...
The only thing is a window between them. So if they don't want to pass anything through the window, they're okay.
It would just be a question of passing.
They wouldn't be able to pass anything. Yeah. And they can walk, they just can't carry objects. All these things with Eruvin Chatzirot are just carrying objects. Right. So if they want to walk to their friend's house, that's fine. But however, if either the window is less than 4 by 4 tefachim, or it is higher than 10 tefachim on the wall, so then that's not considered a passageway between the two chatzirot, so therefore they have no choice but to be separate. If the window is the right dimensions and it's within the right height, then they can combine the two chatzirot. They have the option of combining the two chatzirot. They're not compelled to do so, but they have the option. If it's too high or the window is too small, they don't have the option at all. The Gemara says, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. This Mishnah seems to support the view of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and it seems like an anonymous Mishnah supporting his view. What's his view? Because there's a big machloket between the Chachamim and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel that we've seen a couple of other times in this Masechet, which is whether lavud, the principle of lavud is that if you have a space that's very small, we consider it closed. So according to the Chachamim, we have in Sukkah also. So according to the Chachamim, less than 3 tefachim we consider sealed. According to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, less than 4 tefachim. So the Gemara is saying maybe this Mishnah that says that the window has to be 4 by 4 tefachim is agreeing with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, because it's saying you need a space of 4 tefachim to be considered an opening. The Gemara says no. Afilu temak Rabbanan adkan lo plige Rabbanan alid Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel el inyan levudin aval inyan pitcha afilu Rabbanan modu di ikadalid al dalid chashiv velala chashiv. That the rabbis would distinguish between the two cases, and they would say when it comes to a space, we want to know what level of gap is considered to be a gap. We say 3 tefachim is a measurement of a gap. If it's less than 3 tefachim, there's no gap. However, when it comes to a wall, an opening, pitcha, a doorway, it has to be of a significant size. It's not just a matter of what's considered a gap between two things and what's not considered a gap between two things. It's a question of what is considered a passage, what's considered a doorway or an opening. An opening has dimensions to it. You don't define the space between two objects the same way you define the dimensions of an opening. The dimensions of an opening could be 4 by 4 tefachim. The space between two things, less than 3 tefachim, they're considered together. 3 tefachim, they're considered apart. But just being apart doesn't mean that it's necessarily a doorway. A doorway requires 4 by 4 tefachim, even according to the Chachamim. Now we said pachot midalad, if it's less than 4 by 4 tefachim, so pshita kevan damar dalad al dalad b'toch hasara mimela ana yadana de pachot midalad ulemala miyud lo. So the Mishnah is somewhat seems to be a redundant Mishnah, because first it says it has to be 4 by 4 tefachim, the window between these two chatzerot, in order to unite them, to give you the option of uniting them. Okay? Has to be 4 by 4 tefachim, and it has to be within 10 tefachim of the ground. If it's higher or it's smaller, it's no good. But that's obvious, that's implied. So why does the Mishnah first tell us that it has to be 4 by 4 tefachim and it has to be within 10 tefachim of the ground? And then it tells us if it's less, than 4 by 4 tefachim, or it's higher than 10 tefachim, then it's no good. That's obvious. That's redundant. We know that from the first set of specifications. So what is the answer? Hakamash malan ta'amad dekulei lemala miyud aval mikzato betoch yud me'arvin shenayim v'imratu me'arvin echad. That what is the reason why the Mishnah repeats it? By saying first that it has to be 4 by 4 tefachim and it has to be within 10 tefachim. And then it says it has, if it's less than 4 by 4 tefachim, or it's higher than 10 tefachim from the ground, then it's no good. Why does it have to emphasize that? Because it has to be totally higher than 10 tefachim to be no good. But if even part of the window is within 10 tefachim of the ground, then it's okay. So it's showing you it's absolute. In other words, if it's totally higher than 10 tefachim,
the window doesn't start.
The window doesn't start before 10 tefachim, exactly. Then we say that it's no good. But if it's within 10 tefachim, it's still within range, even if just the bottom is within 10 tefachim, it's still within range of uniting the two chatzerot. Now the Gemara says, Tanena leha. The Tanu Rabbanan. This is a reiteration of what we've already learned. Kulol lemala miyud umektato b'toch asara, kulol b'toch yud umektato lemala miyud, me'arvin shnayim v'imratu me'arvin achad. It says already, we learned already in a Baraita, that if the entire window is above 10 tefachim, okay, but a little of it is within 10 tefachim, or most of it is within, when it says all of it, it means most of it is within 10 tefachim, and a little bit is above 10 tefachim, so that's still considered to be within range. That's still considered to be within the range that window can be said to unite the two chatzerot. So hashtag kulo lemalam yud umektato b'toch yud amrin amrat. So we already said that if the entirety, if most of it is above 10 tefachim and only a little bit is within 10 tefachim, so there amart me'arvin shenayim v'imratu me'arvin echad. So you told us that that's enough, even if the majority is above 10 tefachim and only a little bit is hanging down, it's good. But then kulo b'toch yud umektato lemalam yud mibaya. So why do you have to tell me about the case where most of it is within 10 tefachim and only a little bit is above 10 tefachim? That's obvious. I mean, if most of it is above 10 tefachim is the cutoff. If most of it is above and only a little bit is hanging down and we say that's good, then certainly if most of it is below 10 tefachim and only a little bit is above, it's certainly good. So the Gemara says, Zov, so what it means is, Zov eno tzarich lomar zo katane. You're right. Sometimes the Baraita will speak in a way, like we said yesterday actually, where it tells you a case, and then it says, this is true, and it goes without saying that this is true. So it's saying to you, if the majority is above 10 tefachim and only a little bit is hanging down, that is okay. And it's not even necessary to mention that if most of it is within 10 tefachim and only a little bit is protruding above 10 tefachim, that it's also considered to be a valid opening between the two chatzerot. So sometimes the Mishnah will just, or the Braitot will say something that really doesn't have any halachic implication. We're not going to force it to have a halachic implication that it doesn't have. We're just going to say that stylistically, the Mishnah, or the Baraita in this case, was being emphatic by telling you that the entirety of the windows does not have to be within 10 tefachim. So then the Gemara goes on and says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Chalon agul. If you have a round window, so now it's a little more complicated. Tzarich shehibekefo 24 tefachim. Ushnayim umashu mehen betoch yud. So if you have she'im yirabe'enu nimtza mashu betoch yud. So we said that if it's a square window, it has to be within 10 tefachim of the ground, right? So now if you have a circular window, the circumference of the circular window has to be 24 tefachim. Not
4 by 4 square inside it.
We're going to see why. So you have to have 24 tefachim around. So that, and 2 and a little bit more, 2 and mashihu it says, a little bit more than 2 tefachim of that circumference have to fall within the 10 tefachim. Okay, so if you draw the line, that bottom curve, 2 and a little bit more of the tefachim have to be within 10 tefachim of the ground.
Of the curve, of the circumference.
Right, 2.5, 2 and a little bit more of that.
It's not 2.5 below.
Right here.
Well, right. In other words, no, it doesn't have to be 2.5 below. 2.5 of the circle, right? Of the circle, yeah. So of the window. So now it says that if you made a square, some of it would be. In other words, if you were to square it, some of it would be hanging beneath 10 tefachim, which is the rule. So So wait a second. We have a general rule that anything that has 3 tefachim in circumference has a tefach in diameter, which is the halachic approximation of pi, right? Right. The halachic approximation of pi is, right? What? The real pi is 3.14, etc., etc., etc. It's it doesn't have it's an infinite sequence. So but in halakha we approximate it as 1 to 3. It's a 1 to 3 ratio. So if you were to have a straight line across, that would mean that you're going to multiply it by 3. So what does that mean? Betresar sagya. It should be enough to have 12 going around, because if you have, that would mean you have a 4. If you have a straight line of 4 going through. So if the dimension that you need is a width of 4, then all that you need in the circumference of the circle is 12. You don't need a circumference of a circle 24. Okay, so now the Gemara says, and we turn to Amud Bet, that's true with regard to a circle. In other words, if you wanted to know the diameter of just the circle itself, that would be true. But here we need a square. In other words, we need 4 by 4. A window of 4 by 4. In which at least the very bottom of the window is lower than 10 tefachim from the ground. But we need a 4 by 4. We don't just need a line of 4 going through the circle. So how much more is a square than a circle? Ravia. What? There might be, yeah. That's a Tosafot. That's something else. So don't look at that yet. Don't look at that yet. Okay. Yeah, don't jump ahead. So it gets because these things are really complicated. So if you jump ahead to the wrong picture, then everyone looks at the wrong picture, and then we get confused. Yeah. So don't even think about that yet. Well, I'll explain that in a second. It's important though. So he says so how much more is a square than a circle? Ravia. Okay. So a square is a quarter more, okay? A quarter more. So that means Beshitzar Sagya. Okay? So then what you should have is, it should be enough to have 16. Why? Because if we're saying that really, what do we need? We need a 4 by 4 tefachim. Right? And how much is 4 by 4 tefachim? 4 by 4 tefachim is a 16 tefach area. Right? So if that's true, so Hane Mile Igula Denafik Migo Ribua. So what happens? So if you have, let's say, in other words, in this case, so Rashi says, he explains, what does it mean 16? So hekef sagya. So he says you need 16 around. So he says sagya.
Area.
What?
That's not area.
In other words, if you
from area to
no, there's two different things, right? So if you're dealing here with the circumference of the circle, you have 16, and then you can fit a square of 4 by 4 into it. Okay, that's what the Gemara is saying now.
Really?
Okay.
So
actually, no. The other way around. I'm sorry. The other way around. Right. If you have a square of 4 by 4, you can fit a 16.8. You could fit a 16 into it. Is what it's saying right now. That's what Rashi says. He says circumference. Right.
Not area.
So he says not area. I used the wrong term. That's coming next area. No, beshitzar. So he says. So Rashi says beshitzar hekef. You have a circumference. Hekef is the word for circumference. So sagyad daled hekef lekol ruach. So then you have 4 lekol ruach from each side. In other words, if you would have a square, okay, and inside the square you make a circle. So you need the window to be a square of 4 by 4. You could fit inside it a circle which has the circumference of 16. That's what Rashi is saying so far. Okay. Now that's true. The Gemara. So still they only need 16. So where's he getting 24? Where's Rabbi Yochanan getting 24? So the Gemara says, that's true when you draw the circle inside the square. But let's say I draw a square inside the circle. So ba'inan tfei you're going to need more. My tama why? Mishum morashad dekarnata. Because you're going to have the corners of the square. In other words, they think of it geometrically always. They're not thinking of it algebraically or however we would think of it, but they're thinking of it geometrically. So geometrically, if you envision it, to put a square inside a circle, you can use that Tosafot picture, but don't get confused by it. If you see the square that's inside the circle, you see that it has to be bigger than when the circle is inside the square is going to be smaller relative to the square. But when you put the square inside the circle is going to be the circle is going to have to be bigger because it has to encompass also the corners that protrude. Okay, so now wait a second. Any amma squared, okay, the diagonal is going to be 1 2/5 amot. Okay, that's the way that they measure it. So if you have a square, so let's say you have a square, so the diagonal on the square is going to be 1 2/5, which means that if you made a circle around it, that would be the diameter. Right? Because if you think about, just look at the square inside the circle, right? So if you draw the diagonal, okay, right, so it's going to be 1 2/5 amot, and now if we're using our mathematical equation of the circumference of the circle being 3 times that, so what are you going to come out with then? You're going to come out with b'shivsar nache chumsha sagya. So that's what you're going to come out with. You're going to come out with 17 minus a fifth, or 16 4/5 is going to be the circumference of that circle that goes around a square of 4 by 4 amot. So if you have, 4 by 4 tefachim. So if you have a 4 by 4 tefach square, and you draw a circle around it, that circle is going to be, according to the Talmudic measurement, 16 4/5. Okay, tefachim, because we're talking about tefachim, not amot here. So still, we don't understand, why do we need 24, according to Rabbi Yochanan? Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan Amar, and here comes one of the most difficult passages in the entire Talmud that everybody goes bonkers over in terms of math. Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, Amar ki dayanei de kesare, that he was following the Caesarean dayanim, or the judges. And some say he was following the rabbis of Caesarea, who said, who said, this is something that we already know, that a circle compared to a square is a quarter. In other words, there's a quarter more in the square than in the circle because of the corners, right? So there's going to be a quarter more when you're going with when you draw a circle inside the square is going to be a quarter larger than the circle. Okay, that the Dayanim said, and that we already saw. However, ribu'a migo igula palga, but a square relative to a circle is going to be half. Now what does that mean? Rashi says you have to take away a square. From the square you have to take away a half. So he says, so Rashi explains on the side, and we're going to see why this is so problematic in a second. So ribu'a migo igula palga, ba'el mishkal mine palga. You have to subtract from it a half. Dahai shiura de payesh dahainu tilta. So basically the way that he's saying it is that now it doesn't make any sense, you have to forgive me, but basically what he's saying is that the diagonal of a square is going to be 2 times its side. So if you have a 4 by 4 square, the diagonal is 8, and therefore what is the circumference of the circle going to be? 24, because it's times 3. In other words, what he means by half is, he means that the side is going to be a half of the diagonal, of the diameter of the circle, you could say, right? The half.
Whose geometry is that?
That geometry doesn't exist, right? So in other words, according to the Caesarean rabbis or dayanim, the diameter of the circle that's drawn around a square is going to be twice the side of the square, which is another way of saying the diagonal of the square is going to be twice its side, right? Now obviously this is a problem because this is simply factually incorrect. Even the very pious art scroll commentary and all that, everybody has to tell you that I wanted to look because I wanted to see how are they going to deal with this, because they're very pious and very, Das Torah oriented. They don't like to say anything is wrong. They basically said this is wrong. This math is wrong. So all of the Rishonim, they go bonkers on trying to figure out, what is this talking about? Where is this? How could this possibly be? It simply doesn't make any sense.
Did they figure it out?
So there's a long gra here. There's a long Hagaota gra on the side that tries to deal with this problem and work out the mathematics by interpreting it different. Obviously, the main problem is, look. So all you need to read is the first line of the gra without going into the math. It says v'chas v'shalom sheta'u. Right? God forbid that they made a mistake. Right? Why does he have to say that? Because Tosafot says on the side. Let's find where it comes from. So he says there, how could the rabbi, how could these dayanim make such an obvious mistake? How could they make such an error? Tosafot asks, because clearly this is not true. And at the end of the Tosafot says something even more heretical here. He says, "V'Rabbi Yochanan dehacha ta'u b'divrehem." Okay, I'm sorry. Ela shehashas b'sukkah v'Rabbi Yochanan dehacha. The Shas in Masechet Sukkah and Rabbi Yochanan here made a mistake in understanding it and thought they meant something that they didn't mean. Okay? So Tosafot explains what they did mean when they said that. And that's what the drawing is. If you take that drawing and you make a square, you draw a circle inside the square, and then you make another square inside.
Inside the circle.
Inside the circle. Okay? Now you can come up with this calculation making sense. Okay?
Because you're measuring from...
Because you're actually measuring the proportion of the small square to the large square. Okay, that's what they were talking about. Okay,
and they say you come up with 8 if you do that.
That you will come up with that the diagonal of this large square is going to be twice the side of the small square. Okay, so right. So he says, so Tosafot says they obviously made a mistake and thought it was talking about the circumference of the circle, and Rabbi Yochanan made a mistake. Now, Rabban Gamliel says, the Gra says, impossible that Rabbi Yochanan made a mistake, how could that be? And he works out another way, and all the Rishonim try to work it out differently. They have different approaches that are mathematically complicated to try to explain how Rabbi Yochanan came up with this. But the point is, it's a big issue, and you can go through lots of different views and opinions on it that will take us very far afield. The bottom line is that the halakha doesn't follow this anyway. The halakha follows what the Gemara said, which is that in order for the window to qualify, if it's a circular window, it has to be 16 4/5 tefachim in circumference, which is what we said is the mathematically correct.
And 2 and change has to be underneath.
And you have to have, with 2 and change of it, has to be underneath that red line of the 10 tefachim.
Did the Gra document what he thought?
Yeah, he explains it here.
Where?
Right here. He talks about he says that he goes into so first he talks about he works on the Tosafot's view, right? And then he says I'm not actually totally. I have to reread it because I had figured it out at some point, but now I can't remember exactly how I figured it out. So I have to come back to it. But I don't want to take you now into that because I remember I had to think through it for a while to figure out exactly what he was saying.
But the problem is that the rabbi, even reading the Quran, didn't buy it.
Well, the Tosafot came later. It came before. The Gra is coming later and saying, no, the Rishonim try to figure out under what circumstance are they talking about.
Could there be something peculiar about Caesarea and the geometry?
I don't think so. They had non-Euclidean.
Well, it was Rome.
It's just unusual because it seems like basic math. That's the problem. The problem is it's basic math. I mean, the way that Tosafot works it out works, but then that makes it not connect to the circle anymore.
But the only thing that Tosafot and the Gra are saying is that he's not saying the math is right. He's saying we're not understanding the premise.
We're not understanding the context.
The context.
Right. Everybody agrees that they didn't. There's no way that somebody just made some totally absurd mathematical statement.
The context doesn't make any sense. So who cares? This one in relation to that one. I mean, it's
right. Unless you were to say that maybe Rabbi Yochanan meant that it has to be a circle. It has to be
a square.
Right. Maybe he had a different understanding of how it had to be. But
square circle.
Yeah. Could be. Yeah, so now we get pachot midalad al dalad, so now we get to less than 4 by 4 tefachim. Yeah, but it's a problem. It's a problem that all the Rishonim have different ways of approaching it. Achronim too try to get into it. So Amar Rav Nachman says, Lo shanu el chalon sheben shtei chatzerot, aval chalon sheben shnei batim, afilu lamala me'asra nami, imratu la'arev me'arvin echad. So he says that this is only true that the window has to be within 10 tefachim of the ground if you're dealing with 2 chatzerot, 2 courtyards. So you're dealing with an outdoor wall. But if you're dealing with 2 houses that are next to each other, who don't have their chatzerot united, they don't have their chatzer united, but they want to be united because the house, you can't transfer things from house to house if there's no eruv chatzerot either. So there, in order to unite the houses, let's say, you don't have to have the window within 10 tefachim of the ground. Why? My tama, what's the reason? Because we look at a house as completely full. We don't look at it as having airspace only up to a 10 tefachim. We look at it as extending to the ceiling as a solid entity. We saw this in Masechet Shabbat too. So therefore, even if the window is very high that connects to two houses, we don't care about that. We view it as still a uniting passageway. Rav objected to Rav Nachman and said, "Echad lichalon sheben shte chatzerot, ve'echad lichalon sheben shte batim, ve'echad lichalon sheben shte aliyot, ve'echad lichalon sheben shne gagin, ve'echad lichalon sheben shne chadarin. Kulan dalid al dalid betoch asara." So the Tosefta says, Rava pointed out, that it says it doesn't make a difference to me whether the window is between two chatzerot, or it's between two houses, or it's between two attics, or it's between two roofs, or it's between two what?
Between two floors.
Where do you see floors?
No.
It doesn't say that. Or between two rooms. It's talking about on the same level so far. Same level.
So
he said,
why is the design there?
That's the next one. Because you guys got. Yeah, I keep telling you, don't look at the pictures ahead because it's very confusing. If you look at the wrong picture, you're going to get mixed up, right? So kulan dalad al dalad betocha. That's why we should take away everyone's pictures.
I don't have
to. Oh, okay. Oh, so you're looking at this one? Yeah. It's don't look at it yet. Don't look at it yet. Yeah. So the point is that in the Tosefta it says Kulan dalid al dalid betoch asara. It says that it doesn't matter whether this window is between two houses, two roofs, two courtyards. It has to be a 4x4 window, and it has to be within 10 tefachim of the ground. Okay. So what is the what's the point
of the ground, not the floor?
Of the floor. Yeah. So it seems though that the 10 tefachim rule of height is applicable also to a window between two houses, not just a window between two chatzerot, like Rav Nachman was saying. So Tirguma, he'll answer you, a chatzerot, it's only talking about the chatzerot. What do you mean? But it says in the Tosefta that it doesn't matter what it's between, whether it's chatzerot or whatever. So he says, Tirguma, adalid al dalid. That general statement that it doesn't matter what what the window is in between, is referring to all cases when it's insofar as the dimensions are concerned. That it has to be a window that's 4x4 tefachim. But the height requirement is only applicable between outdoor things, between chatzirot. But indoor, if it's in between two houses, like a townhouse that let's say had a door or a window between two townhouses that were connected, 4x4. That 4x4, but it could be as high as you want. It could be up at the ceiling. It wouldn't matter because the whole house is looked at as one solid structure. Rabbi Abba asked Rav Nachman, Lula patoch ben bayit la'aliyah tzarich sulam kavol hatiro, in tzarich sulam kavol hatiro. Here's the case that you're looking at in the picture. Probably I don't see the picture, but I'm assuming so. So you have some kind of a lul, some kind of an opening in the roof between two levels. So you have an upstairs apartment. Some guy's living in the upstairs attic, and you're living in the on the bottom, the ground level. Okay, so now you want to connect. It's two different owners. So in order to transfer something from my house to the upstairs or the upstairs to downstairs, if there's an eruvei chatzerot, by the way, in the whole chatzer outside, it includes all the houses. But if there's no eruvei chatzerot, so then each owner is restricted to his own domain. So even if physically we're connected, that my apartment is on the ground level and we have an opening in the roof that goes to your apartment is upstairs, we can't transfer objects back and forth. If there's no Eruvei Chatzerot in our neighborhood that unites all of the homes, then we would have to make an Eruv between the two of us to be able to carry back and forth. Okay, so he says that what about that case? Do you need a sulam? Does there need to be a ladder in between the two, since we're saying that it doesn't matter how high the window is, and this window is very high because it's from my ceiling to get to your upstairs apartment, right? So it's a very high thing. Does there need to be like a staircase or a ladder there to be considered a passageway from one apartment to the other, or not?
Well, how's the upstairs guy going to get
I guess I don't know how he normally gets down. Maybe he normally gets down outside. Maybe he has an outside staircase, like a motel, like an outside way of getting down. But this is between our houses. We also have an opening between us. I would assume that that's the case because he's not jumping down. He's not a fireman coming down through my house every time he has to go out. Right, so I assume so. So could that connect us? So he says, do you need a sulam kavod? So when we say that the house is full, maybe that's only when there's a window connecting us from the side. But in the middle of that house, when it's on the roof, maybe not. Or maybe it doesn't matter. In other words, what he's saying is that, do we say that there has to actually be a ladder or a staircase here? Because that rule, that a chalon, that a window in between two houses can be as high as you want, that's only when the window's on the side of the house. But when it's up and down, we wouldn't automatically say that a hole in the roof is considered a connection between my apartment and your apartment unless there is a ladder there, fixed there. That's what he's asking. So he says to him, Amar le eno tzarich, you don't need it. So he originally thought that what he meant was that you don't need a fixed ladder, but you need a ladder to be present. In other words, there needs to be some ladder that can be slid under that hole so that you can get in and out. So Itmar, it was stated, Amar Rav Yosef Bar Yomi, Amar Rav Nachman, Echad Sulam Kavod, Echad Sulam Arai, Eno Tzarich. And that's the halacha, that if you have a hole between the upper apartment and the lower apartment in the house, in the same structure, you don't need a ladder at all. The fact that it potentially could be, you could transfer objects, or you could move from, you could bring a ladder if you needed to, and that you could drop objects. You could have a dumbwaiter like these types,
or a
right?
basket
or whatever. A basket could be lowered, whatever it is. So therefore, that hole is considered to connect the two dwellings, and therefore they can make an eruv between the two of them. They can unite. And that is the halacha that's brought in Shulchan Aruch. Now the new Mishnah says, now we come to the case different from our first Mishnah. This is the case where you do not have the option of making an eruv chatzerot, which is where you have a wall that's 10 tefachim high and it's 4 tefachim thick. It has no door, no window. It's a complete separation between the two chatzerot. There's no doors connecting them. So you cannot unite these two chatzerot into one eruv. They can have their own eruv, but they can't transfer from one to the other. Hayu barosho perot. If there were fruits sitting on top of a basket of fruit sitting on top of this wall. So it says, elu olin mikan ve'ochlin ve'elu olin mikan ve'ochlin. So people from chatzer number 1 can go onto the roof, go onto the wall and eat there. People from the other chatzer can also go onto the wall and eat there because they share the wall. The wall is a neutral zone. It doesn't belong to either chatzer. However, but you can't take from the wall into your domain. So the person can jump onto the wall from either chatzer and can eat up there. But he can't take something sitting on that wall into his chatzer or to the other chatzer, because the chatzer is a neutral zone. You can't transfer anything back and forth. Nifritza kotel ad 10 amot. Let's say the wall has a breach up to 10 amot. So we know that up to 10 amot is considered a doorway, right? Anything up to but not including 10 amot is considered a doorway. Me'arevin shnayim ve'imratu me'arevin echad. Now there's a doorway between the two chatzerot. Now they have the ability to become one if they want to, or not. They have an option. Because it's like a doorway. Yoter mikan, if it's more than 10 amot, me'arvin echad ve'en me'arvin shnayim. Now they are one chatzer whether they like it or not. Right? If it's more than 10 amot, the wall is obliterated. So you have basically 4 cases. You have a case of a solid wall that's 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim thick, which disconnects these two chatzerot completely. There's no uniting them. Then you have a situation where you either have a door or a breach in the wall that's less than 10 amot, or a window between the two chatzerot. Right? That's actually just one case. So I guess there's 3 cases. Mm-hmm. So that enables you it gives you the option. You have the option to unite or the option to stay separate. And then you have a case where the wall is obliterated because there's more than a 10 amah break in the wall. Now you have no choice. You must be one chatzer.
10 amot?
10 amot is the measure.
You one chatzer without doing anything?
You have no choice. You must make an eruv with everybody.
But you have to.
It's not an option anymore. Well, now you're one chatzer, which means if you want to make an eruv chatzerot, you have to include everybody. That's the difference. If it's 2 chatzerot, then people in your chatzer make 1, people in the other chatzer make 1.
It's not that.
Right. So that now it's saying they all have to join in one, they have no choice. So you have the 2 extremes where they have no choice, and the middle case where they have an option. So now the Gemara says, Ein bar ba'amai. We always are talking about a wall here that has 10 tefachim in height and has 4 tefachim in thickness. What if it doesn't have 4 tefachim in thickness? What if it's a thin wall? A thin but tall wall. What do we do with that? So Amar Rav says, Avir shte reshuyot sholetet bo, lo yaziz bo afilu milon nimah. So what he says is that since it doesn't have its own identity, as Rashi explains, since it's not significant enough on its own, it's batel, it's nullified by both. And they both share this thin wall. It's not neutral because it doesn't have its own identity. So it's subsumed under both. And since it's subsumed under both, it's a restricted area. Okay, so it becomes totally restricted because it's both chatzerot. They overlap.
So if he sits on it, he's sitting on my.
He's sitting on yours, and if you sit on it, you're sitting on his. Yeah. It's not neutral because it doesn't have its own identity. Mm-hmm. Instead, it's double, which means since it's double, it's no good for anything. You can't even move stuff around on the wall because it's considered moving it within both chatzerot.
Meaning you cannot even do a Eruv chatzerot for one, or what do you mean by?
Forget Eruv chatzerot. We're talking about the wall itself. This wall separates the two chatzerot.
Right.
So they're separate. They can't make an eruv together because the wall separates them, right? But the question is on the wall itself. So if the wall itself has 4 tefachim in thickness, it's its own place. It's a neutral place. So I can sit up there and eat have a picnic, lunch on there. You can come, as long as we don't bring things back and forth. If there's stuff up there, I can jump up there and eat there. You could jump up there and eat there. But Rav is saying if it's thin, now it doesn't even have its own identity as a neutral zone. So you can't move anything up there.
On top of the wall.
Right, because on top of the wall is now considered both chatzerot, which is a problem. Both is no good. Neither one is okay, but both is no good.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we move to Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar Elo Ma'alin Mikan Vochlin Ve'elo Ma'alin Mikan Vochlin. I disagree. It's even better. It's not worse. It's better. Now people in Chatzer number 1 can bring stuff onto the wall, and people in Chatzer number 2 can also bring stuff. If the wall is 4 tefachim in thickness, they can't bring anything up. They can just go up there and eat whatever's there. They can't bring up and they can't bring down. But if it's thinner, then people from both chatzerot are allowed to go up, and they're allowed to, and they're allowed to even bring their own food.
Because it's a non-entity.
Because it's a non-entity, right? He's saying non-entity is better. He's saying you're going into a nothing. You're not even going into a neutral zone. You're going into a no place. Okay, that's the question. How do you deal with this? It has no definition. So do you subsume it under both? Or do you say it's nothing? It's another universe. It's another dimension. So he says...
It's like if you, from the fact that there's a wall, you consider the 2 chatzerot 1 chatzer for the thing. Why then is the wall considered anything at all? I guess that's the
whole question. That's the whole issue.
That's the second
because it's part of the chatzer now.
Right. So what he says is now Tanan elu. So now the problem is like this: Tanan elu olin v'kan v'ochlin ve'elo olin v'kan v'ochlin. In our Mishnah, we said you can go up on the wall and eat from either chatzer. Olin in malin lo, which means you can go up, but you can't bring anything. So Achi Kamar, this is what it means: Yesh bo arba al arba olin ve'in malin olin in malin lo. That if the wall has 4 tefachim in thickness, you can go up there, but you can't bring anything. En bo arba al arba ma'alin nami. But if it has less than 4 tefachim in thickness, you can go up there and you can even bring stuff. It's even better. So the whole point is, since it doesn't have an identity, what do we do with it? Do we give it the identity of both chatzerot and make it even worse? Or do we give it no identity and say it's even better? Because by carrying, even bringing something from your chatzer is no problem, because you're not bringing it out of the chatzer. Because that wall doesn't have 4 tefachim in width, so therefore it's like you're bringing it nowhere. Okay? You're not bringing it to some place that's neutral. In other words, if it had 4 tefachim in thickness, then you're bringing something from your chatzer into a new place, which is a neutral place. But if it has less than 4 tefachim, you're bringing it nowhere. So bringing it nowhere is okay, according to Rabbi Yochanan. Ve'azda Rabbi Yochanan l'tamein. Rabbi Yochanan is consistent with his own reasoning. The dichiyata Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, because when Rav Dimi came, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Makom shein bo arba'a al arba'a mutar lefnei reshut harabim v'lefnei reshut hayachid lechatef alav u'bilvad shelo yachlifu. This is something we learned in Masechet Shabbat, that if you have an area that's less than 4 by 4 tefachim, it's called Makom Petur. And in Makom Petur, people from the public domain can put something into it, and people from the private domain can put something into it. As long as they don't do a trick and the people in the public domain don't put something in the Makom Patur, and then somebody from the private domain comes and takes it. That you can't do. But both can use it. Why? Because he says it's a nothing. It's zero. Now, according to Rav, this wall is not like a Makom Patur.
That's right.
Okay? But according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's the same. So now, V'Rav Letle, the Rav Dimi, doesn't Rav hold of this idea of Makom Patur? So why doesn't he apply it to the wall?
Because it's a different...
So Rav says, well, let's see why. I b'reshuyot deoraita hachinami, hacha b'mayeskinan, b'reshuyot Rabbanan v'chachamim asu chizuk ledivrehem yoter mishel Torah. He says an unbelievable thing. He says, you know what? When we're dealing with deoraita, I would be more lenient. When we're dealing with Reshuta Rabim and Reshuta Yachid, and this is Makom Patur, I agree, less than 4 by 4 Tvachim, it's nothing. But here we're dealing with the Rabbanan, Chatzerot, Eruvin Chatzerot, going on the wall, taking out of your Chatzer into another Chatzer. He says here, Chachamim asu chizuk l'divrehem yoter mishal Torah. The Chachamim have to be more worried, because people take the Torah very seriously. They're going to be very strict. They're not going to mess around. But the Divrei Chachamim, they say, this is rabbinic anyway. I'm only taking out of a Chatzer. Who cares about that? I'm going to go on. So since the rabbis have to be extra strict with their own words to protect them, because people don't take them seriously, so they prohibited even a wall that would normally be Makom Patur. So it's not that Rav disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan. Rav actually says, you know what, Rabbi Yochanan? Consistency-wise, you're totally right. Less than 4 Tefachim in width, it's nothing. It's nothing. But since it's Divrei Chachamim, and the Chachamim are worried that people will not take their institutions as seriously, they have to be extra strict and say even a Makom Patur is going to be prohibited. And rather than consider it a nothing, rather than consider it nothing at all, we consider it both. And by considering an extension of both, we basically make it restricted on members of both Chatzerot to carry anything even on the wall itself.